My stepmother didn't ask me for help. She slid an $800,000 debt statement across the dinner table, placed a pen beside it, and told me to pay for her son's failures or stop calling myself family. But the part that changed something in me wasn't her voice. It was my father. He sat right there, staring at the floor, and pushed the pen toward my hand. So I gave them 24 hours. By the next evening, my phone showed 8 missed calls. The money they thought they controlled was gone, and the secret I found proved the debt was never the real trap. They had been planning to erase my mother's legacy. I keep thinking about that pen on the table. Not the $800,000. Not even Shanda's voice. The pen. Because when my father pushed it toward me, I understood something no son wants to understand. Silence can be a choice, and sometimes betrayal doesn't raise its voice. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from tonight. And be honest. If your own family did this to you, would you sign or walk away? My father called me at 5:42 on a Tuesday evening. That detail stayed with me because I was standing in my kitchen in Bellevue, rinsing out a coffee mug, thinking about nothing more serious than whether I had enough leftovers for dinner. "Talon," Dad said, his voice too careful. "Can you come by tonight? Shanda wants to talk as a family." That was the first warning. In my family, as a family, usually meant someone had already made a decision, and I was being invited to accept the consequences. I almost asked what it was about. Instead, I looked toward the small wooden tray near my front door. My mother's old pocket watch sat there, scratched and dull, the one thing of hers I still carried when I knew I needed strength. I slipped it into my jacket pocket before I left. By 6:30, I was pulling into the driveway of the Mercer house. Same glass front, same manicured shrubs, same cold feeling in my chest every time I walked through that door. Shanda opened it before I knocked. "Talon," she said, like my name tasted inconvenient. "Good." We're in the dining room. No hug, no how are you, no offer of coffee. Dad sat at the head of the table with his hands folded. Cameron Vallow, Shanda's son, leaned back in the chair across from me, wearing a watch that cost more than my first car. He didn't look worried. That should have told me everything. Shanda placed a red folder on the table and pushed it toward me. Not gently. It slid across the polished wood and stopped inches from my hand. I opened it because I still thought, foolishly, that maybe they wanted advice. I worked with numbers, financial restructuring, risk, exit planning. People came to me when they had made a mess and needed a way out, but this wasn't a request. Bank notices, private loan statements, legal demands, failed property investments, missed payments. Cameron's name appeared over and over. The total sat on the final page. $800,000. Before I could speak, Shanda laid another paper beside it, a wire transfer form, already filled out. My bank information was missing, but the amount was typed in neatly. There was even a pen beside the signature line. "You'll pay this," she said, "or you are no longer part of this family." The room went quiet in that strange way. Quiet becomes loud. I looked at Cameron. He shrugged, like we were discussing a dinner tab. "You can afford it," he said. "Don't make this ugly." I felt my thumb press against the pocket watch through my jacket. The metal was cold. I turned to my father. Dad didn't look at me, not once. His eyes stayed fixed on the floor near his shoes. Then, without saying a word, he nudged the pen a little closer to my hand. That hurt more than Shanda's demand. She leaned forward. "You owe us, Talon. I raised you after your mother died. You were difficult, quiet, always acting like the world owed you tenderness. Do you know what it costs to carry a burden like that?" I let her finish, because at 42 years old, I had finally learned something. People who are used to controlling the room often reveal the most when you stop interrupting them. "A burden," I repeated. She smiled thinly. "A useless one, at times. But tonight, you can finally do something for this family." Dad's jaw tightened. Still silent, I closed the folder, slowly, carefully. Then I pushed it back across the table. "No." Shanda blinked, as if the word had come from the furniture. Cameron sat forward. "Come on, man." "No," I said again, quieter this time. Shanda laughed once. "You're upset. That's fine. Take the night. Pray on it. Sleep on it. I stood. For the first time in that house, I didn't feel like a child waiting to be tolerated. I looked at my father. He still wouldn't meet my eyes. "You have 24 hours, I said. Shanda frowned. "For what?" I picked up my keys. "To tell me the truth before I start finding it myself." No one followed me to the door. Outside, the night air off Lake Washington felt sharp and clean. I sat in my truck for a moment before starting the engine, my hand wrapped around my mother's pocket watch. As I drove away, I realized something that scared me more than the debt itself. They weren't asking for my money. They were planning for a future that depended on owning my life. I did not drive home fast. I took the long way along Lake Washington, letting the dark water move beside me, while the lights from Bellevue blurred across the windshield. My phone stayed face down in the passenger seat. I knew if I looked, there would be messages. Shanda did not like being refused, and Cameron had never handled consequences well. When I finally got home, I did not turn on the television. I did not pour a drink. I hung my jacket over the back of a chair and placed my mother's pocket watch on the kitchen table. The house felt too quiet. I opened the watch and looked at the tiny photograph tucked inside. My mother, Lacey, smiling in a blue sweater, her hair caught by the wind. The hinge made its old soft click, a sound I had known since I was a boy. I sat there until after midnight, thinking about every check I had written to keep peace. A tax shortage on Dad's rental property. A bridge loan for Cameron's can't-miss project. Insurance premiums, Shanda said, were just temporary. A family vacation I was not invited to, but somehow helped cover. They never called it help, they called it family. By 8 the next morning, I was at my credit union downtown. The branch manager, Paula, had known me for years. She took one look at my face and did not waste time with small talk. "What do you need, Talon?" "I need a full list of every family-related authorization, discretionary payment, linked account, recurring transfer, and emergency access connected to my name." Her expression changed just slightly. "That may take a little while. I'll wait." We sat in a glass office overlooking a wet Seattle street while she printed pages I had not thought about in years. Some I remembered, some I did not. That was the part that made my hands go still. There were old permissions I had given Dad after his surgery. A line of credit I had guaranteed for one of Cameron's early deals. Small recurring payments buried under bland descriptions. Property maintenance. Premium adjustment. Operating support. Nothing large enough to scream bug itself, but together they formed a quiet pipeline. My pipeline. Paula folded her hands. "Do you want these terminated?" I looked at the stack. Then I thought of my father pushing that pen toward me. "Yes. All of them?" "All of them." She slid the documents over. I signed until my wrist ached. Every signature felt less like punishment and more like removing a hand from my throat. By the time I left, it was close to noon. Rain had started. The steady, kind people in Western Washington stopped noticing after a while. I pulled into a small bookstore cafe near my office because I needed coffee and 10 minutes where nobody wanted anything from me. Lark Turner was behind the counter, sorting a box of used hardcovers. She owned the place, a narrow little shop that smelled like paper, cinnamon, and old wood. I had met her 2 years earlier when I helped her renegotiate a lease, and she was one of the few people who never treated my advice like a blank check. "You look like somebody handed you bad news in a nice folder," she said. That almost made me smile. Close enough. She poured coffee without asking. "Family?" I looked up. She shrugged. "Only family can make a man look that tired before lunch." I told her just enough. Not the whole mess, just the debt, the demand, the way they expected me to pay because I always had. Lark listened without interrupting. Then she said, "Some people mistake reliability for weakness." That sentence stayed with me all the way home. In the afternoon, I went into my home office and started pulling old folders from the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. Tax records, Dad's old requests, copies of property documents I had kept because numbers made more sense to me than people ever had. Around 4 o'clock, I found something I did not remember saving, a property transfer summary. The date was recent. The signature line was odd. Dad's name appeared beside a company I had never heard of, Northline Family Holdings. I searched the rest of the stack. There it was again, and again. Attached to insurance policies, old business notes, and one document connected to Cameron's debt. A holding company does not appear in that many places by accident. I took photos of everything. At 7:16, Dad called. I let it ring twice before answering. "Talon," he said, sounding tired. "Have you thought things over?" There it was. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "Shanda crossed a line." Not, "I should have defended you." Just the money. "I've thought about a lot," I said. He sighed. "Your stepmother was upset. She spoke harshly, but you know how she gets when Cameron is under pressure." That old sentence. You know how she gets. The family translation was simple. Accept it, absorb it, move on. I looked at the documents spread across my desk. "No, Dad," I said. "I don't think I do anymore." He went quiet. I waited for him to choose me. He did not. After the call ended, I worked until the room outside my desk lamp turned black. Northline Family Holdings kept appearing in places it should not have been. Debt, transfers, guarantees, property notes. The structure was old, not new. That was when the real question landed. What if Cameron's debt was not the real emergency? What if the $800,000 was only leverage? And what if they needed my signature because something much bigger was already starting to collapse? The next morning, I drove back toward my father's property, not to argue, not to beg, but to find a forgotten box from the storage room behind his garage. I had a feeling Shanda had spent years counting on one thing, that I would never look closely enough. I reached my father's place a little after 9. The main house looked quiet from the driveway, but I didn't go to the front door. I wasn't there to have another conversation with Shanda, and I had no interest in giving Cameron another chance to say, "Don't make this harder than it has to be," like I was the one who had created the mess. Behind the garage sat the old storage room Dad used when he still ran his construction company. As a kid, I spent entire Saturdays there sorting invoices, sweeping sawdust, labeling bins of screws and brackets. Back then, I thought helping made me useful. Later, I realized useful was the only version of me Shanda ever tolerated. The lock still used the same rusted key from my truck console. The door dragged against the concrete when I opened it. The air inside smelled like cardboard, old motor oil, and damp wood. Dust floated through the thin strip of morning light coming from the small side window. I started with the back shelves. Dad had always labeled things in block letters: payroll, permits, equipment, taxes. Then I saw one box pushed behind a stack of cracked plastic tubs. Lacey Mercer, estate, personal. My hand stopped before it touched the lid. For most of my life, I had been told there was nothing complicated about my mother's affairs. Shanda used to say, "Your mother left memories, Talon, not money. Stop acting like the world cheated you." I pulled the box down and set it on an old workbench. Inside were papers I had never seen: partnership agreements, land records, insurance documents, a small folder from a law office in Seattle. My mother's name appeared beside a property venture tied to parcels near Redmond, back before that whole area became as expensive as it is now. I read slowly at first, then faster. My mother had owned a share, not a sentimental share, not a token piece. A real interest in a land investment that had grown in value after she died. And there were references to a beneficiary, me. I stood there with the papers in both hands, listening to the rain start tapping on the metal roof. All those years, I believed I inherited grief, a pocket watch, and a few photographs. Maybe I had inherited something else too. The deeper I dug, the uglier it became. There were canceled checks with Cameron's name in the memo line, college support, equipment, business advance, down payment assistance. I remembered being 17, working evenings at a hardware store so I could buy a used Honda with a cracked dashboard. That same summer, Cameron got a new truck because, according to Shanda, your brother needs confidence if he's going to build something. I remembered asking Dad once if there was help for tuition. He had rubbed his forehead and said, "Money's tight, son." The papers in front of me said money had not been tight. It had been redirected. I took pictures of every page, then carried the most important copies to Lark's bookstore. I didn't want to sit alone with it. Not yet. She cleared a little table in the back between the biography shelf and a cart of donated cookbooks. No drama, no speech. Just a yellow legal pad, 2 coffees, and a woman willing to look at the facts without telling me how I should feel. After 20 minutes, she tapped one page with her pen. Talon, have you considered something? What? That they may have needed you to believe you had nothing. Because if you knew you had a claim, they couldn't keep treating you like you were lucky to be included. I looked down at the documents. That sentence turned the whole room quiet. By late afternoon, I was back home, spreading copies across my dining table. The signatures bothered me. Some of Dad's looked rushed. Others looked too smooth, like someone had practiced the shape but missed the weight of his hand. One document had correction fluid over a date. Another had a notary stamp that didn't match the county listed at the top. A transfer referenced an attachment that wasn't there. That was when the family story stopped being sad. It became dangerous. Around 7, headlights crossed my front window. Dad. He came up the porch slowly, shoulders bent inside his raincoat. I opened the door but didn't step aside right away. His eyes moved past me to the dining table. The color drained from his face. Where did you get those? He asked. Not, what are those? Not, why are you looking at old papers? He knew. I let that settle between us. From your storage room. He closed his eyes for a second. Talon, tell me the truth. He looked older than he had 2 nights ago, but I didn't mistake that for innocence. Some things were done to keep the family together, he said. I almost laughed, but there was no humor left in me. Whose family? He didn't answer. And that was the answer. Dad turned and walked back to his car without explaining a single page. I watched him pull away, his taillights fading down the wet street. On my table, one company name appeared beside nearly every major transfer. Northline Family Holdings. And one transaction was dated just 3 weeks before Shanda demanded the $800,000. I did not sleep much after Dad left, not because I was scared of the papers. Numbers had never frightened me. What kept me awake was how easily my father had recognized them. He had not been confused. He had been caught. By 6:40 the next morning, I had my laptop open, coffee beside me, and Northline Family Holdings typed into the Washington Business Search database. At first, it looked harmless. A private holding company. Registered years earlier. Bellevue mailing address. Clean filings. No obvious red flags. But then I pulled property records. That was where the pattern started showing. A condo near Kirkland. A small commercial lot in Redmond. A partial interest in a warehouse property near Kent. All touched Northline at some point. Some transfers were direct. Others moved through layered paperwork that looked boring enough to make most people stop reading. I did not stop. By 10, I had a yellow legal pad filled with dates, parcel numbers, names, and arrows. Cameron's failed projects did not sit outside the family assets. They wrapped around them like vines. The debt was not standing by itself. It was tied to something valuable, something they had hidden. I called Elias Rourke just before lunch. He was an estate attorney in downtown Seattle, the kind of man people described as calm until you realized calm was his weapon. A former client had recommended him years ago, and I had kept his card in a drawer, hoping never to need it. His assistant gave me a cancellation slot at 1:30. I drove into the city with copies of the documents in a sealed folder. Traffic on I-90 gave me too much time to think, so I kept my mind on practical things. Dates, signatures, entities, transfers, facts kept me steady. Elias read for nearly 20 minutes before speaking. Then he took off his glasses and said, "Do not sign anything they put in front of you." I already figured that part. "No," he said. "I mean anything. Not a family settlement. Not a temporary agreement. Not a promise to cover a loan while everyone cools down." That got my attention. He tapped Northline's name with his pen. This structure is too deliberate. People do not build something like this because of one bad investment. They build it because they want control without visibility. What are they hiding? Possibly ownership, possibly liability, possibly both. He leaned back. People who hide one thing usually hide 3 more. I left his office with instructions. Preserve records. Stop informal conversations. Keep everything in writing, and say less than I wanted to say. That last one was harder than it sounded. On the way home, my phone buzzed with a text from Cameron. "You need to stop acting like a victim. Mom says you're making Dad sick." A minute later, another one came. "You always wanted to feel important. Congratulations. I did not answer. At 5:20, I pulled into my driveway and saw Shanda's Mercedes parked outside my house. She was waiting on the porch like she owned the boards under her shoes. I got out slowly and carried my briefcase to the door. "What are you doing, Talon?" she asked. No greeting, no pretense. "I'm going inside." "You know what I mean." "I do." Her mouth tightened. "Your father is upset. Cameron is under tremendous pressure. And now you're calling lawyers and digging through things that don't concern you." I unlocked the door and stepped inside. She followed before I invited her. That was Shanda. Boundaries were only rules for other people. In the kitchen, I set my keys on the counter and turned to face her. "Why was Northline created?" She blinked once. "Excuse me? Why was my mother's estate connected to a holding company I was never told about?" Her hand closed around the strap of her purse. "You're confused. You're reading papers you don't understand." "Then help me understand." "That tone does not work with me." "I'm not using a tone. I'm asking a question." For once, she did not have an immediate answer. So she reached for the old tools. Family, sacrifice, gratitude. "You were taken into this home when your father was drowning in grief," she said. "I did what I could with a difficult child. You don't get to turn around now and act like we stole from you." "There it is," I said. "What?" "The story. I was difficult. Cameron was promising. You were generous. Dad was helpless. Same script, different room." Her face hardened. "You have always had a cruel way of twisting kindness." "No. I had a habit of calling neglect kindness because everyone else did." She moved toward the door, then stopped. "What did you mean when you gave us 24 hours? I looked at her for a moment. "I meant you had one day to tell me the truth before I started uncovering it myself." For the first time, her confidence slipped. Not completely, just enough. A small tremor moved through her fingers before she tucked them under her arm. "You are making a mistake." "I've made plenty," I said. "Trusting all of you was the expensive one." She left without another word. That night, Elias emailed a transfer agreement pulled from public records. One page was missing, but the rest was enough. An asset tied to my mother had moved into Northline years earlier. The authorization signature looked wrong, and 3 weeks after that transfer, Cameron received funding for his first real estate venture. I stared at that date until the room went quiet around me. Then I understood why they needed me to pay a debt that was never truly theirs to begin with. By 2 a.m, I had stopped pretending I was only reviewing paperwork. I was measuring the shape of a betrayal. The transfer agreement sat in front of me, marked with a red circle around one date. 3 weeks before Shanda had pushed that $800,000 debt across the table, an asset tied to my mother had been moved deeper into Northline Family Holdings. Beside my elbow were coffee I never finished, a sandwich I had forgotten to eat, and my mother's pocket watch, open beside the documents like a quiet witness. My phone kept lighting up. Shanda, Cameron, Dad, unknown number, Shanda, again. By sunrise, there were 98 missed calls. That should have felt satisfying. It did not. All it told me was that the machine I had been feeding for half my life had finally noticed the power was off. For a few minutes, I considered stopping. I could close the folder, let Elias handle nothing, let them keep whatever they had already taken. I had a house, a business, a life separate from theirs. I could get in my truck, drive to the coast, and let the whole Mercer name collapse without me watching. Then I looked at my mother's name on the trust reference, Lacey Mercer. That was what stopped me. This was not only about what they had done to me, it was about what they had erased from her. Around noon, I drove to Lark's bookstore. I did not bring all the files. Just one copy of the transfer and the page with Northline's name. She was restocking a shelf near the front window when I walked in. "You look like you haven't slept," she said. I haven't. She made tea instead of coffee, which was probably wise. I sat at the small table in back while rain tapped against the glass. I told her I was thinking of walking away. Lark did not rush to argue. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and sat across from me. "One of my part-time workers quit last month," she said. Sweet girl, smart, but every time a customer treated her badly, she apologized. I asked her why. She said, My mom always told me I was lucky anyone put up with me. I looked down at my hands. Lark's voice softened. Sometimes people don't break you by yelling. Sometimes they break you by convincing you that being treated badly is normal. That landed harder than advice would have, because I knew exactly what she meant. Shanda had not needed chains. She had used phrases. Be grateful. Don't be difficult. Your father has enough stress. Cameron needs support. Family comes first. By evening, I was home again, and my father finally got through because I answered. His voice sounded thin. Talon, please, stop digging. Not, you're wrong. Not, this is a misunderstanding. Stop digging. I leaned back in my chair. Why? A long pause followed. If this gets out, it will destroy everything. What is everything, Dad? You know what I mean. No, I don't think I do. He breathed unevenly, like each word cost him something. Your mother's affairs were complicated. Shanda helped me keep things stable. I was grieving. I made decisions I thought were best for the family. There it was again. The family. I asked, did you ever think I was part of it? He said nothing. My chest felt hollow, but my mind stayed clear. That was new. Before I could answer, another call came in from Elias. I told Dad I had to go and switched lines. Elias did not bother with pleasantries. I found the missing trust record. I sat forward. He explained it carefully. My mother had created a protected interest for me before she died. Not huge at the time, but tied to property that later appreciated. It was supposed to remain untouched until I reached adulthood. It did not. The trust had been dissolved early, rerouted through Northline, and later used to support ventures connected to Cameron. I closed my eyes. The golden child had not simply been favored. He had been funded. Who approved it? I asked. Elias hesitated just long enough for me to know the answer would hurt. I'm sending you the supplemental memorandum now. The email arrived while I was still on the phone. I opened the attachment. Shanda's initials appeared on the second page, her signature on the third. Then, near the bottom, below a paragraph about family restructuring and asset preservation, was my father's name, Blaine Mercer, not copied, not shaky, not forged. Real. I read it once. Then again. Then a third time. Because some part of me still wanted the letters to rearrange themselves into anything else. They did not. My hand moved toward the pocket watch, without thinking. It slipped from my fingers and struck the table with a small, sharp sound. That sound seemed to fill the room. For years I had told myself Dad was weak. Now I understood something worse. He had not failed to protect me because he did not know. He had chosen who deserved protection, and it had not been me. The watch lay face up beside the memorandum. The tiny photograph inside had shifted loose from the fall. Behind it, I noticed the edge of something folded. A piece of paper. Hidden where I had never thought to look. I picked up the pocket watch with both hands, the way you handle something fragile even when it is made of metal. The little photograph of my mother had shifted loose from its frame. I eased it out carefully with the edge of a letter opener, and behind it was a folded strip of paper, yellowed at the corners, thin from age. My name was written on the outside. Talon. One word. My mother's handwriting. I sat down before I opened it. The note was short. Maybe she had not had the strength for more. My sweet boy, if you ever find this, it means you kept the watch. I hope that means some part of you remembered you were loved before anyone tried to make you earn it. People may ask you to sacrifice and call it family. Be careful. Love does not always ask one person to carry the whole weight. Never mistake sacrifice for love when only one person is paying the price. Mom. I read it once. Then again. The room did not change, but I did. Not loudly, not all at once. Something inside me simply stopped begging. I had spent years wondering whether I had been too sensitive, too stubborn, too unwilling to let the past go. But my mother had seen this possibility before I was old enough to understand it. She had left me a warning inside the only thing no one thought to take. For the next few hours, I moved slowly. I showered, changed clothes, made coffee, then sat at my desk with her note beside the trust records. By noon, I knew what the choice really was. If I exposed everything, Dad would lose the story he had hidden behind for half my life. Cameron's comfortable world might fall apart. Shanda's spotless family image would not survive. If I stayed quiet, my mother's name would remain buried under their paperwork. That was the part I could not accept. At 2:15, Cameron showed up at my office without an appointment. My assistant gave me a look through the glass wall that said, "Do you want me to call security?" I shook my head and opened the door. Cameron came in wearing a fleece vest with a private golf club logo and the same restless energy he always had when someone else was supposed to fix his problem. "You need to stop this," he said before sitting down. "Good afternoon to you too." He ignored that. "Mom is beside herself. Dad barely slept. You're turning this into some kind of legal circus. I didn't create the documents." "No, but you're waving them around like a weapon." I leaned back. "Would you help me if our positions were reversed?" He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His phone buzzed. He looked at it instead of me. That was answer enough. After he left, I called Elias Rourke. An hour later, I was in his Seattle office with the watch note, the memorandum, the Northline records, and the trust references organized in 3 folders. Elias read my mother's note quietly. He did not dramatize it. Good attorneys do not need to perform concern. "This changes the emotional picture," he said. "The legal picture still depends on records, but this helps establish intent. More importantly, it helps explain why certain assets should have been preserved. What can we do now?" He slid a printed checklist across the desk. Document preservation notices, asset disclosure demands, corporate record requests, no public accusations, no threats. We make them preserve everything, then we see who panics. That sounded right. Clean, adult, no shouting in driveways, no family group chat arguments, just facts. "Send them," I said. By 5:30, the notices had gone out. Shanda received one, Cameron received one, Dad received one, Northline Family Holdings received one. The first call came at 5:47. Then another. Then a text from Shanda. "You have no idea what you're doing." Then Cameron. "This is harassment." Then Dad. "Please don't make this worse." I did not respond. At 7:10, 3 cars pulled up outside my house. Shanda's Mercedes first, Cameron's SUV behind it, Dad's old sedan last. I watched from the window as they gathered on my porch like a committee arriving to correct an employee. When I opened the door, Shanda stepped forward. "You've gone too far." "No," I said. "I've finally gone far enough." Cameron pointed toward the street. "You're trying to ruin us because you got your feelings hurt," Shanda added. "After everything this family did for you, this is how you repay us?" Dad looked exhausted. "Talon, maybe we can all sit down and work out a compromise." I turned to him. "A compromise over what? My mother's trust? My name on documents I never saw? Cameron's debt being placed in front of me like a dinner bill?" Shanda's face tightened. "You always twist things. You were a difficult child, and now you're a difficult man." That sentence would have cut me once. Not anymore. I reached into my pocket and touched the watch. "You taught me my whole life that family meant sacrifice," I said. "You just forgot to mention I was always supposed to be the one sacrificed." No one spoke. For once, not even Shanda. They left after that, but the peace lasted less than an hour. At 9:32, I found a plain envelope on my doorstep. No stamp, no return address. Inside was an old photograph of my mother standing beside 3 people I did not recognize. On the back, someone had written 6 words. "You don't know the whole story." I didn't touch the photograph for almost a full minute. It lay on my kitchen table beneath the pendant light, old enough that the corners had gone soft. My mother stood on the left, younger than I had ever known her, wearing a cream blouse and that calm half-smile I used to see in every picture of her. Beside her were 3 people, 2 men and 1 woman. I recognized none of them. On the back, the 6 words looked rushed. "You don't know the whole story." I photographed both sides and sent them to Elias before I went to bed. He called me just after 8 the next morning. "Where did this come from?" "My doorstep." "That bothers me. That makes 2 of us." He had already enlarged the image. One of the men in the photograph matched a name from an old partnership record, Walter Klein, a former accountant who had worked briefly with my father's company before disappearing from the paperwork altogether. He may know how Northline was built, Elias said. If he's still alive, I'll find him. The photograph should have scared me. Instead, it sharpened my focus. Then Shanda made her next move. By Monday, the calls started coming from people who never called me unless there was a funeral, a wedding, or a tax question. A former neighbor left a message saying she was disappointed to hear I was dragging my father through legal trouble. One of Dad's old business friends texted, "Family disputes should stay private." A cousin I hadn't seen in years wrote, "Shanda says you're trying to take the house. Is that true?" There it was. The smear campaign. Not loud, not messy. Just poison dropped into cups of coffee all over Bellevue. By Tuesday afternoon, I walked into a meeting with a longtime business contact and watched his expression change the moment he saw me. "Rough week, I hear," he said. "That depends who you heard it from." He looked uncomfortable. "People are saying you're going after your dad's assets." I smiled, not because it was funny, but because anger would have helped Shanda more than me. People say a lot when they don't have documents. That evening, I went to Lark's bookstore after closing. She was stacking chairs, and the place smelled faintly of cinnamon tea and rain-soaked coats. "You're getting hit from all sides," she said. "I'm tired," I admitted. It was the first honest thing I had said all day. Not tired from work, not tired from reading documents, tired of being turned into the villain because I had finally stopped playing the role they assigned me. Lark locked the front door and sat across from me. "If a lie survives because everyone is afraid of what the truth will cost," she said, "then the lie becomes the family legacy." I looked at the old photograph on my phone. What if telling the truth destroys what's left? She didn't answer quickly. I respected that. Then she said, "Maybe what's left is only the part they let you see." The next day, Elias found Walter Klein in a retirement community outside Everett. He was 81, cautious, and not interested in being pulled into Mercer family business. But when Elias mentioned Lacey Mercer, the man agreed to talk. We met him in a quiet conference room near the waterfront. Walter's hands shook slightly when he accepted the coffee. "I told your father not to do it," he said before I asked a single question. Elias leaned forward. "Do what?" "Use Northline that way." Walter explained it in plain terms, which was what I needed. Northline had not been created to protect assets from market risk. It had been created to move ownership out of sight. My mother's interest was supposed to remain traceable. Instead, after her death, pieces of it were shuffled, renamed, layered, and diluted. "Your stepmother pushed hard," Walter said, "but your father signed. I remember because I asked him whether you had been notified." My throat tightened. "What did he say?" Walter looked down at his coffee. "He said you were too young to understand." That sentence told me more than any chart. Back at Elias's office, we spent 3 hours building a timeline. Property transfers, trust references, Cameron's early funding, Northline's registration, the $800,000 demand. Near the end, Elias stopped moving. "What?" I asked. He turned a page toward me. One key transfer required consent from all listed beneficiaries. One beneficiary had no signature, me, because no one had told me I existed inside the structure. Elias tapped the blank line. "This is their weak point." I stared at that empty space. They had spent half my life convincing me I was worth nothing to the family. Now, the whole plan appeared to rest on the fact that legally, I mattered. 2 nights later, Shanda and Cameron cornered me at a local business association dinner. I had gone because hiding would only make their story stronger. Shanda approached with that polished smile she used when witnesses were present. "Talon," she said loudly enough for the nearby table to hear. "I do hope you'll stop this before your father's health suffers," Cameron added. "Some people get a little money and forget who raised them." Several heads turned. The old me would have explained, defended, tried to prove I was not greedy, not cruel, not ungrateful. I looked at both of them and kept my voice even. "Interesting. Every document I filed is public record. If what I'm saying isn't true, you have nothing to fear." The room quieted. Cameron looked away first. Shanda's smile stayed in place, but her eyes changed. For the first time, she understood I knew more than she thought. The next morning, Elias called before sunrise. His voice was calm, but tighter than usual. "Talon," he said, They filed something overnight, and this is about to get uglier. Elias did not start with hello. They filed a waiver, he said. They claim you signed away any interest connected to your mother's estate years ago. I sat up in bed before I was fully awake. That's impossible. I know, but it looks convincing. By 7:15, I was in his office downtown. Elias had the filing spread across his conference table. Shanda and Cameron were trying to paint me as a greedy son using legal technicalities to attack an elderly father. One affidavit said Dad had been emotionally pressured. Another suggested I had always resented Cameron and was using old records to punish him. Then Elias showed me the waiver. My name sat at the bottom. Talon Mercer. The signature looked close enough to make my stomach tighten. The document claimed I had voluntarily surrendered any claim tied to Lacey Mercer's trust. If the court accepted it, everything we had built could fall apart. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. Then I noticed the date, the 14th of June, 2009. I stared at it until the fear began to clear. Elias, I said. I wasn't in Washington that day. He looked up. I was in Guatemala. Disaster response contract, mudslide recovery project. I have travel records, payroll, passport stamps, photos with timestamps. Elias reached for a pen. Get me all of it. The hearing was set for 2 days later. It was not a full trial, just an emergency hearing to decide whether assets tied to Northline should be frozen while the documents were reviewed. But walking into that courtroom felt like walking into 20 years of silence. Shanda sat upright, polished and composed. Cameron looked like he had not slept. Dad sat beside them, smaller somehow, hands folded in his lap. Their attorney argued that I was destabilizing family assets out of bitterness. He used words like legacy, care, and elder protection. Shanda dabbed at her eyes at exactly the right moments. Then Elias stood. No drama, no raised voice. He placed my travel records into evidence. Airline itinerary, contract invoice, payroll deposit, passport entry stamp, a dated photograph from the recovery site. The alleged waiver, Elias said, was supposedly signed in Bellevue on a day Mr. Mercer was outside the country. The judge looked at the document again. Shanda's face did not collapse. People like Shanda rarely collapse all at once, but her stillness changed. It became effort. Elias continued. One inconsistency became 3. The witness address was wrong. The Notary Commission had not been active on that date. The formatting matched documents produced years later. By the time he finished, the room had gone quiet. Then came the records from Discovery. That was the moment the whole thing turned. Northline had not been built to rescue Cameron from debt. It had been built to move my mother's assets out of reach before I understood they existed. Cameron's ventures were funded from structures tied back to those assets. The $800,000 demand was not the endgame. It was bait. If I had paid and signed their family settlement, I would have confirmed the very waiver they had forged. Shanda had not wanted my help. She wanted my surrender. The judge ordered several Northline assets frozen pending review. Cameron covered his face with both hands. Shanda whispered something to her attorney, but he did not answer her. Then Dad stood. His voice was barely steady. I knew some of it. I turned toward him. He would not look away this time. I told myself I was preserving the family, he said. The words should have moved me. They did not. You were preserving comfort, I said. Nobody spoke after that. Outside the courthouse, the air felt brighter than it should have. I opened my mother's pocket watch and read her hidden line again. Never mistake sacrifice for love when only one person is paying the price. For the first time, I understood it without pain clouding the edges. Winning had not healed me. It had only opened the door. Now, I had to decide what kind of life I wanted after the war. 6 months passed before I understood that peace does not arrive like a parade. It comes quietly. It shows up in small things. A full night of sleep. Coffee that does not go cold because you forgot to drink it. A phone that can buzz without making your chest tighten. By spring, most of the disputed assets tied to Northline were under court-supervised review. Several transfers had already been reversed or frozen. Elias told me more would take time, and I believed him. I had learned by then that justice moves more like a ferry crossing Puget Sound than a sports car on an open highway. Slow, steady, Impossible to rush. Shanda did not go to prison. Life is rarely that clean. But her reputation was gone. The charity board stopped calling. The women who used to admire her at luncheons suddenly had packed schedules. People who once repeated her version of the story began saying they had always wondered. That was the funny thing about image. Once it cracked, everyone claimed they saw the flaw first. Cameron sold the SUV, then the boat share, then the condo he used to brag about near Kirkland. I heard through Elias that he had taken a job managing properties for someone else, which may have been the most honest work he had done in years. Dad was harder. He lost no mansion, no fortune, no public title. What he lost was the comfort of pretending he had been helpless. One Thursday afternoon, a letter arrived in his handwriting. I let it sit on my kitchen counter until after dinner. Then I opened it with the same letter opener I had used on my mother's watch. Talon, I have written this 4 times and thrown away the first 3. I failed you. Not once, many times. I told myself silence was keeping peace, but I see now I was protecting myself from conflict. I let Shanda speak for the family because it was easier than standing up to her. I let Cameron receive what should have been explained to you. I should have chosen you. I read that line twice. I should have chosen you. There were years when those words would have healed something in me. Now, they only named the wound. I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer. I did not reply that day. Not because I wanted to punish him, because forgiveness should never be performed just to make the guilty feel better. A month later, I met Elias at his office to sign the papers for the Lacey Mercer Financial Literacy Fund. It was not a monument. My mother would have disliked anything too grand. It was a scholarship and education program for young adults who had aged out of unstable homes, kids who knew what it meant to grow up believing support always came with strings. If this helps even one person avoid what happened to you, Elias said, it's worth building. I looked at the name on the documents. Lacey Mercer. This time, nobody had hidden it. Lark helped with the first small fundraiser at her bookstore. She arranged folding chairs between shelves, made coffee in paper cups, and acted like it was no big deal when half the room stayed after closing to talk. She never tried to save me. That was one reason I trusted her. She simply stood beside me while I learned how not to disappear. One evening, after the event, we walked out together under a soft Seattle rain. You look lighter, she said. I feel older. She smiled. That can be a good thing. A week later, I went to see my father. The Mercer house looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe buildings shrink when the people inside them lose their power over you. Dad opened the door himself. No Shanda behind him. No Cameron on the couch. Just an old man in a cardigan, holding the door like he was not sure he still had the right. We sat in the kitchen. For a while, neither of us said much. Finally, he asked, "Can we start over?" I looked at him across the table, where he once pushed a pen toward me and helped break something that had already been fragile. "No," I said. His face fell, but I kept going. "We can start from here." That was all I could give. It was honest. It was not cruelty. It was a boundary. Before I left, I walked alone to the back patio. The lake was gray under the afternoon sky. I took my mother's pocket watch from my coat and opened it. Her note was still folded inside. Never mistake sacrifice for love when only one person is paying the price. I read it one last time there, then closed the watch. A few days later, I placed it in a glass case at the small office we rented for the fund. Beneath it, a brass plate read, Lacey Mercer. You never have to earn your place in this world. That night, my phone buzzed while I was locking up. Lark, dinner at 7? I smiled. For most of my life, I believed family was something you earned by being useful, by paying, by staying quiet, by forgiving before anyone changed. I know better now. Real family is not built on guilt. It is not built on fear. It is not built on one person carrying everybody else's weight. It is built on respect. Sometimes the people who demand the most from you are the ones who value you the least. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop paying the price of belonging. The night my stepmother demanded I pay her son's $800,000 debt, she thought she was taking my future. What she actually gave me was the courage to reclaim it.